I'm Dr. Fiona Lovely, and this is the Not Your Mother's Menopause podcast. I'm taking the taboos of menopause and perimenopause and bringing light to the dark. No bullshit, no shame. It's time for us to gain a new paradigm in female health, out with the old and in with the new, and I'm bringing fresh perspectives from someone in the arena. I've been practicing women's health for nearly 20 years, and I'm spilling the tea on what it means to live at midlife, knowing that the best is yet to come. I'm sharing my Gen X approach to living through this transition. Sassy, a bit sweary, and always honest. Tactical tips and instantly usable information is my aim. I hope to make you laugh and that you learn something new that helps you embrace the change. Together, we bring power to the peri. Onward to the podcast. Hello, listeners. This is the Not Your Mother's Menopause podcast. I'm Dr. Fiona Lovely, and today I have two guests with me, and I am going to introduce you to Jack Tuckner and Catherine Crider here shortly. But first, I'm going to share some statistics. Did you know that 9 out of 10 women experience menopausal symptoms? And 1/3 of us say our symptoms negatively impact our performance at work? And that 2/3 of us would not feel comfortable speaking to our supervisor about our symptoms, and 1/4 of us hid our symptoms while at work. Now, this is a really fascinating conversation, and that is, how do we support a woman's rights in the workplace at menopause? And today's guests bring a very unique perspective. And I've brought on Jack and Catherine, lawyers, to the show today. And they are attorneys in New York City who specialize in this very thing. So, menopause inclusive workplaces are trending in the convos. I'm certainly seeing more and more of it, but it's hard to know where we start to fix the problem, especially when the problem is so big. And what's interesting is that many of us have a difficult time even saying we're in menopause and not having a good time, let alone tell somebody that maybe isn't even female, so doesn't understand, maybe isn't even in the same age group, so really doesn't understand. It's like that tall poppy gets cut thing, right? Like, we don't want to pop our heads up and say, listen, I'm really uncomfortable when I'm working and it's affecting me. So Jack Tuckner and Catherine Crider are here to tell us their experience of how women are treated in the workplace. By the way, we talk not just about menopause, but we talk about women's rights in the workplace, everything from pregnancy to breastfeeding, etc. It's a really, really fascinating conversation. And I recorded it a few days back, and it's just been on my mind ever since. So interesting. I'm sure you will find it as interesting as I do. Let me introduce my guests. Jack Tuckner is a women's rights in the workplace attorney and a founding partner of Tuckner, Sipser, Weinstock & Sipser, LLP, a New York-based law firm dedicated to workplace gender rights. With over 20 years of experience, Jack advocates for the working woman at all stages of your reproductive life cycle, from pregnancy through menopause. His practice focuses on combating sexual harassment, pregnancy discrimination, illegal gender pay disparity, sex discrimination, maternity leave matters, unlawful retaliation, and wrongful termination. Jack has served as an advocate and commentator on women's discrimination issues across the media spectrum, including the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, the New York Daily News, NBC's Nightly News with Brian Williams, Good Morning America, Anderson Cooper, The Joy Behar Show, NPR, CNN, Inside Edition, numerous local television and radio stations, and at civic and grassroots community meetings and seminars throughout the New York tri-state area. Catherine Crider is my guest today as well. Catherine Crider was admitted to the California bar in 2015 In addition to being a lawyer, Catherine is an active labor and postpartum doula helping families. When she's not working with families one-on-one, she teaches childbirth education and postpartum classes for new parents across the United States. Prior to becoming a lawyer, Catherine worked with parents and children in a variety of roles as a licensed elementary and special educator. Catherine also writes for websites on women's health and parenting related topics. Material she has produced can be found on Forbes.com, Healthline.com, and Education.com. Now, Jack and Catherine outline how we can ask for help when in the workplace and looking for support in the menopause transition. And I think that is the ultimate takeaway of this conversation. But before we get to that, we talk about a number of different things in this discussion. And again, I found myself just quite fascinated by the whole thing. So no matter where you live in the world, this will be useful information for you to advocate for yourself as you're going through your menopause transition. Without further ado, please have a listen to my conversation with Jack Tuckner and Catherine Crider. Let's talk about stress for a minute. Stress isn't just hard on your mental health, it's also expensive for your biology. If you're dealing with chronic stress, you may want to take a good mineral supplement. Because it turns out when you're constantly stressed, your body burns through a lot more minerals than usual. Chronic daily stress depletes magnesium, potassium, selenium, zinc, and more. Even worse, those mineral deficiencies make future stress hit you harder. If you want to break the cycle of chronic stress, you have to replenish your mineral stores. Minerals make you more resilient to the negative effects of stress, helping you get back on your feet. That's why I love Beam Minerals. Beam makes things easy. You just take a capful of concentrated, mineral-rich liquid each morning. It tastes like water, and it gives you every essential mineral your body needs to deal with the stress in the right ratios with high bioavailability. I've been using Beam for a while now. You'll feel it working within days. You'll have way more energy, and you'll be amazed by the difference it makes for your stress levels. Give Beam a try. Head to beamminerals.com. That's BEAMMINERALS.com and use the code LOVELY for 20% off your first order. Thanks, Beam. This is the Not Your Mother's Menopause podcast, and I'm Dr. Fiona Lovely, and I'm thrilled today to be joined by a couple of people. First time I've interviewed two people at once, so this could be interesting. Catherine Crider and Jack Tuckner, women's rights in the workplace attorneys and advocates. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you, Fiona. Pleasure to be here. Thanks for having us.
Oh, I'm so excited about this conversation because I think it's time. I mean, talk about the ultimate time for us to be discussing women's rights in the workplace. I know we're going to get into it, but tell me first, Jack, if you don't mind going first, tell me how it is that you ended up a women's rights attorney.
Yeah, it is odd. And it's just like I say to my daughters when they were growing up, like, you're going to go to a male OBGYN, like, don't be stupid. Of course not. How did I end up here? Well, first of all, I grew up in kind of a matriarchal household. It was women that I always held in the highest esteem because the men in my family were just not. I watched actually, you'll know I'm of a boomer age, when my mother couldn't get a credit card on her own. And here I am, this is in my lifetime, because women couldn't before 1974 in the United States without a male cosigner. And so all of these things have always been a feminist and a womanist and a liberal. And frankly, when it came time, there was some point in my career at the beginning, I was a public defender because I've always wanted to advocate for the underdog, always sort of public interest type of a lawyer. And one point I was in a seminar in Kona, Hawaii, and I just was on a mountaintop, like saying, what's next? Because I was burning out in this public defender job in New York City. And suddenly it struck me essentially like a thunderbolt. Well, the largest minority in the United States that's underserved is women. unequal pay still, pregnancy discrimination, sexual harassment, the menopause issues, all of these issues, it's like, who would, if I've been saying for years, if men could get pregnant, we'd have an 18-month long fully paid FMLA leave, and we still have no pay, no leave, no paid leave. So if that answers the question, I just was drawn to nobody else was doing it. No one else was doing it. So when people say to me at the beginning, why are you doing this? Name one other lawyer who's advocating for women's rights in the workplace. That's the Cliff's Notes version, I think, Fiona.
Great question. I have some comments, but Catherine, please tell us your story. How did you end up here?
So I was actually a teacher, Fiona. So I was teaching, and then I decided to do law school at night, which led me to no longer being able to teach elementary school. I needed to go a little younger, so I wasn't doing as much lesson planning at night. So I started working with preschoolers a lot while I was going through law school, and their families would expand and grow, which led me into becoming a doula. And I realized I really love to see families expanding and growing and have these great, healthy starts to life. And that actually impacted what I decided to do after law school, led me to Jack, who's one of the few women's rights specific law firms in the nation. When he started, he was basically the only one. And so I kind of joined forces with him because we have like minded interests in we want women and families to succeed. We want them to have the abilities to hold their jobs if they decide to be workers after they grow their families and during the pregnancy process or whatever their future might hold.
Okay, really interesting. So, Jack, you said the largest minority group in the United States is women. Is that how you said it? Did I catch that correctly?
Yeah, I think I'd said sort of the largest majority minority group, as if to say no
That's
one
the
thinks
word.
of women as a marginalized community,
Yep.
except except when it comes to women's health, when it comes to women's rights, it's as if women are second class citizens. Men wouldn't put up with it. Men wouldn't put up with being paid 78 cents on the dollar in the US. Men wouldn't put up with what women have put up with since until last year. Pregnancy discrimination was so alive and well in the United States that anything you weren't entitled to maternity leave, you weren't entitled to flexibility until last year with during your gestational during the 9 months of your pregnancy. If you needed flexibility, if you needed light duty, you could be fired, even though they wouldn't fire others who needed flexibility, who were in car accidents, who were injured on the job. In our famous case here, Peggy Young versus the United Parcel Service, which is the one that got the law finally changed. Peggy Young was an air driver, meaning she delivered for UPS the light packages, those letter packages mostly, but she had a high risk pregnancy. Her physician said she can't lift more than whatever 20 pounds. She could have gotten easily help or reassigned to an office job. UPS said no. She ended up losing her job, losing her benefits. Meanwhile, UPS gave those flexible options to people who lost their driver's licenses through DWI, for God's sake. People who were injured on the job, people who
Wow.
people who were otherwise had disabilities but weren't pregnancy. And again, the notion was, hey, sister, you got pregnant electively, and pregnancy isn't a disability, so no soup for you, sister. That's kind of what it came down to. This case went all the way up to the Supreme Court of the United States in 2015, and not the current Supreme Court that would have voted against her. And in a 5-4 decision, just enough to get her over the top, she won, and the Supreme Court said, you know what, this whole system with the Pregnancy Discrimination Act and the asymmetry to how we apply it screws women. So we're saying this has to change, at least for this case. Subsequent to that, by 2022, and it just finally became law in 2023, we finally got the Pregnant Workers Fairness Act that makes pregnancy itself a protected status. All women in the United States who work for employers with at least 15 employees are covered by all of the discrimination laws, including the Pregnant Workers Fairness Act and the sister statute that was passed last year at the same time, the PUMP Act, which stands for Providing Urgent Maternal Protections for Nursing Mothers, now allows 9 million more women postpartum to express milk for a year in the workplace in private, not in the bathroom, safely, without retaliation, without discrimination. So these were landmark civil rights, women's rights cases, the last two in the United States, and perhaps the last two, unfortunately, for some time now to come.
Yeah. Yeah, it sounds like it, doesn't it? You know, it's so funny. Sometimes I hear these things and you're talking about expressing milk. And we're talking about reproductive rights in the United States. You haven't mentioned that, so I'll bring it up. But um, why is it that these things need to be governed? Like, isn't it more of a humanist thing? Like, and isn't it between a woman and her own lifestyle? Like, why are we here? How did we get here is the question I have.
Well, I'll jump in before Jack answers and just say I think that what women go through at work is not something we routinely talk about. I'll tell you, when you go through doula trainings and things of that nature, we spend a lot of time talking about what women should expect in the hospital, what bringing home a new baby will look like with them. What their work situation is going to look like is not discussed with women. And so it's almost this like taboo, like kept hidden secret that you might face these issues at work. So I think part of the problem is we just don't discuss them.
Wow.
And women, and I'll say this, Fiona, may I call you
Mhm.
Fiona?
Yeah, please
Fiona,
do. Please,
thank you.
please, please.
Fiona, we look, I just want everybody to know who's listening. I tuned into this Not Your Mother's Menopause podcast. We're talking about anything but. So I want to say we're going to talk about why you're protected in the United States already. You're protected. Your menopause symptoms are protected, and you're entitled to flexibility. But the backdrop to this is women are damned if they do and damned if they don't. When it comes to reproductive freedom and autonomy, obviously that's now under wide scale attack. And then when it even comes to voluntary pregnancy, you're not supported in the workplace. We're the only nation in the industrialized
Yes.
world that doesn't have paid maternity leave.
Yes.
The only
Yes.
one. There's a couple like Swaziland and Papua New Guinea are the other two. Nobody else. So we are really an outliner. American exceptionalism, yeah, that's what it is when it comes to, sort of degrading to women's rights and
Mhm.
women's issues from health to workplace rights to economic rights. We're kind of
We're
dead
behind.
last.
So, with this Pregnant Workers Fairness Act, is there paid maternity leave? Is it part of the law now?
No,
Still
no, there's no,
not.
still not paid. They're still not paid. They're still not paid. And we've had a bill pending in the United States. Just while we're talking about this, the Paycheck Fairness Act since 1997, it never passes. There's one party that always opposes it. This would close all the loopholes and problems with the Equal Pay Act of 1963. Women still don't have the leverage, the legal juice to be paid similar to men because essentially one faction, one party opposes things that would help support and assist women. So we don't know. We have no pay. The Pregnant Workers Fairness Act still didn't make. There's still no federally protected paid leave. New York State, for example, we have a paid maternity leave program. California has one. Some of the bluer, more progressive states are starting to do so, but no, you're still on your own unless you work for a company that has a generous leave policy itself, or you have your own short-term disability policy. No, you take leave, you take your 3 months of maternity leave on your own dime.
Majority minority, indeed. Indeed.
Indeed.
So I've been doing this show for almost 10 years, and in the last year I always finish with a question to my guests, which I will ask you guys at the end, but recently I've started adding on a second question. And that second question has come around as I've heard from other places on the planet that are supporting women's health in a much bigger fashion. For example, the NHS in the UK is now supporting birth control and hormone replacement therapy for all women that want to have it. We now have that in Canada as well. It's just fairly new to us. I think birth control has been covered for a while, but HRT is now under that as well. And I had a patient earlier this year tell me that her daughter had given birth in Amsterdam and that the government provided a night nurse to any woman who has had a baby, which Jack, you got kids, right? So you know that first month is just crazy. Like nobody's sleeping, right?
Right.
Babies So
Right.
a night nurse takes over the nighttime duties while a woman can heal from actually the process of pregnancy, labor, and delivery. And I believe there's an African country that actually gives time off for menstrual symptoms, PMS, and that sort of thing. And I was thinking, why is it? Like, I want to start to have this question out there about what would a menopause leave look like? Now, of course, this is me, a privileged white woman in Canada, where we generally have support for women's rights just as much as anybody else's, to the best of my knowledge, anyways. So I think about women that are not within those same categories. But how do we start to create this? And here's the thing that always comes back: is most of my guests are from the United States. What comes back at me is the United States doesn't even have a maternity leave. Why are we talking about a menopause leave? So how is it, again, we're so far behind on this? It's bananas to me.
So
Catherine.
I
Well,
would throw out that some of the bigger corporations in the United States, you look at a Google, Apple, Facebook, Meta, whatever you want to call them these days, they actually have very generous paternal leave programs for the father figures when a child is born. And one of the really nice things about those leave programs is they give them X amount of time off over the child's first year of life for bonding. So many times, the larger organizations in the United States have recognized that it's the whole first year of life that's really important. And maybe we should allow the families to make the decision themselves how they want to allocate that leave.
What a
Because in
concept.
many situations, as we all know, maybe you know you're going to need childcare in the second half of the year. And so it makes sense to bank some of that. Or maybe you know that the birthing person had a really traumatic birth and they're going to need more recovery time. So we're going to use more on the forefront. I think a very similar idea to that could be really useful when it comes to menopause, because we recognize that except in cases of surgical menopause, the symptoms that women experience with menopause can flare up over years, periods of times, all kinds of things. So it might make sense to do something along those lines where there's X amount of days that you can use over a certain period of years or something like that. I do think that is a really useful tidbit we can take from some of the organizations that they've already been doing with pregnancy.
Yeah, I like that a lot. I like that a lot. That's great. That's actually gives me a great deal of hope knowing that's happening. I know that's a fairly new thing here in Canada too, in the last 10 years, allowing the father of the child to take whatever leave they needed to as well, supported by the
mhm.
government and the employer. Jack, what say you about the menopause leave?
Here's the problem from our perspective, from my perspective on this. Catherine and I, the United States Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, several OBGYNs, and two Democratic Congresswomen have been working on a Menopause Workers Fairness Act. It's modeled after the very same framework of this Pregnant Workers Fairness Act that just became law on June 27th, 2023, because it speaks to medical conditions related to women's reproductive life cycle from menses to menopause. It's any condition. And of course, we're talking about perimenopause and menopause. So this was exciting. Now that sort of menopause has been finally, the taboo is cracking a little bit, the sort of shame-based culture around all things women's, reproductive issues. It's no longer just as icky as it was when people say, we're not going to talk about that. There are still people. There was a woman in Georgia in a not so long ago case who in perimenopause was having excessive bleeding. She
Mhm.
bled on her chair in the office and she was written up. And when the second time it happened, when she bled onto her office's carpet, they fired her for not being sufficiently hygienic.
Oh,
So
Jesus.
I'm saying we're in it from my perspective, we're still in kind of a, medievalism. The culture
Yes.
does not. So the Menopause Workers Fairness Act would have, I mean, people could still take FMLA leave unpaid if what's happening in menopause is causing like a serious medical physical issue for you. But that's not what we're talking about. In order to get the type of flexibility, remote work, menopause absence policies, take a week if you need it, take a couple of days, um, we would need a specific policy that was embodied in the Menopause Workers Fairness Act, just like it's now for pregnancy in the Pregnant Workers Fairness Act. But being that's not going to happen now, because again, I know we have a politically diverse audience, but I will say this because it's factual.
Mhm.
There is one party in the United States that always votes against equal pay, paycheck fairness, the equal. Women didn't even have protections not to be fired for being women in the United States until the 60s. So all the civil rights acts that the Civil Rights Act, the Equal Pay Act, um, the Pregnancy Discrimination Act, the Title VII, all of the laws that protect women were only ultimately passed over the strenuous objections of one party. And ultimately, we were able to get those passed. Right now, it's just not likely. We're going kind of backwards, unfortunately. But what I wanted to talk about, if we can, is the good news about
Please.
why still you are protected, how to make that happen, if that's an appropriate.
Yeah, Jack, I want you to just hang on to that. I want to come
Sure.
back to that. I want to read some statistics for the listeners so they know why it is this is so important. And the statistics I've pulled were for the Menopause Foundation of Canada. So just take these numbers and blow them up a whole pile more for the United States, keeping in mind that the population of the entire country of Canada is about the same as the population of California.
Right.
Although we got a lot more land. Okay. So the state of the nation with women workers. So 9 out of 10 of us experience menopausal symptoms. A quarter of us hid our symptoms while at work. A third say working women say menopause symptoms negatively impact their performance at work. And 2/3 would not feel comfortable talking to the manager or supervisor about it or human resources. So the numbers for the Canadian economy, that's $3.5 billion lost annually to the unmanaged symptoms of menopause. There are 5 million working women in the United States over the age of 40. In fact, it's the largest growing group of workers. It's a quarter of Canada's workforce and 540,000 lost days of work. So those are the numbers that I wanted to read out. Now, again, that's from the Menopause Foundation of Canada. It was done last year. It'll be exponentially, but we're talking 3.5 billion in the Canadian economy. What must it be in the US economy?
Right. It's many billions. And in the U.S. economy, the U.S. workforce, 20% of the U.S. workforce are women 45 to 64. At the top of their game, at the height of their careers. Many of them they self-exile when things get tough and they don't know what to
Yes.
do, or they are managed out of the workforce. And yeah, I could, if you'd like, I could read that if this is an appropriate time for
This is
that.
a great time. Please do.
Okay,
Please share.
so this, I'm going to read a direct message, a DM I received on LinkedIn because I've been posting, Catherine and I've been posting, regularly about menopause issues over the last couple of years and why you have protection, and kind of been the first to kind of sound this alarm and tell people why they're protected. So here was the DM that I received, and I'm reading with permission from this person. Hi, Jack. Your post about perimenopause in the workplace resonates and raises questions about what I have been experiencing in my workplace. I am 49 and recently able to put the puzzle pieces together that I have been coping with perimenopause symptoms, misdiagnosed as depression last May to June. Meanwhile, I have been placed on a PIP, that's a performance improvement plan, at work for my inability to, quote, manage tasks, unquote, which I can firmly now say is a result of my symptoms. I have been successful in my career, receiving promotions and stellar reviews. This is the first time in my career mention of and being placed on a PIP came up. So here's someone who, and for those of you, I don't know, everybody in the United States presumably knows, or many people know, I don't know if you use that terminology in Canada, but performance improvement plan is basically probation. It's when a company, that's a tool, that's a management tool to performance manage an employee out. We're going to be giving you, this is our paper trail. You're not pulling your weight. You're not, cutting the mustard. We don't like how you roll. And we're letting you know that unless you do ba 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 ba, and usually what they tell you have to do is almost unattainable in the next 30 or 60 days, you're going to have to ship out. We're going to let you go. And of course, it busts your morale. It doesn't end up, they're not doing it to make you work better. They're doing it so in case you would have been able to say, well, you're firing me because of I'm a woman, or I'm black or brown or over 40, whatever. This is their paper trail. So here's the point. She was unable to manage tasks, so to speak, because of her perimenopause symptoms. Had she, or let me just bracket that for a second and say, perimenopause and menopause symptoms are often, if not always, covered under the Americans with Disabilities Act, Amendments Act of 2008. But basically, it's the ADA. Just like the Pregnant Workers Fairness Act was like the ADA for pregnant women, the Menopause Workers Fairness Act would have been the ADA for menopause. But right now, even without that law we're talking about, the current law, the ADA, if you have menopause symptoms or perimenopause symptoms that affect, and here's the definitions in the statute, they substantially affect a major life activity. First, what's a major life activity? Sleeping, walking, working, thinking, basically what it sounds like. So on that category alone, insomnia, just using insomnia as one of a big symptom, perimenopause and menopause.
Huge.
So when you have that, and that's why one of the reasons she might not have been managing tasks well at this point, not to mention she had rage and brain fog and hot flashes and all kinds of symptoms, and you know they're endless.
Mm-hmm.
So that would have entitled her to what's called an interactive process, a cooperative dialogue with her employer with a view toward a reasonable accommodation, i.e. flexibility, whatever she needed to help her over this hump until she found a menopause-aware practitioner to start a protocol to help her. Because as she also mentioned, she went to her PCP, she told me this later, she went to her internist who said, yeah, you're just depressed, it's in your head, just, take some Xanax. So a lot of women don't first know, especially when it's an early onset and you're like, what's going on with me? A lot of primary care practitioners, and even I dare say some OBGYNs are not up to snuff on this stuff. And it's only now that many are starting to understand that HRT is not what they said it was, when a whole generation of women, like my generation of women, missed out,
Yep.
right, for 20 years because of that very flawed study. So
Mm-hmm.
we now know bioidentical hormones don't cause breast cancer, and that
Mm-hmm.
was based on synthetic horse urine. Everything about it was wrong. But
You're right.
right,
Yep.
so the bottom line is, if you're suffering from symptoms and you have a practitioner, a healthcare provider, could be a naturopath, could be a nurse practitioner, doesn't need to be, your OBGYN, but someone who will at least document that you're in perimenopause or menopause, you're entitled to a discussion and flexibility with your employer. The only reason that they could say, no, we're not doing it, is if they can argue and ultimately prove that it would be an undue hardship on the business to let you do blah, 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 X, Y, and Z, which is, it's not like you're asking for, a year's vacation or sabbatical. You're asking for some type of flexibility. The request itself, very important, the request itself, which ultimately should be in writing, is considered protected activity. It's a civil rights protected activity under all of the workplace laws. And so your company has to take it seriously, investigate it, and respond in good faith. And if what you're saying is, yeah, I need you not to write me up for this BS, but I also need support, not punishment, right? It was like, that's, what our incoming president said, like women with abortions, they need to be punished. Women don't need to be punished for any of the reproductive issues. They need support. And by the way, perimenopause and menopause are bookend stages of a woman's reproductive life cycle, which is why, without going into the specifics, why the framework is already there for us in America if we remain a constitutional republic and a democracy, which is a little bit in question now, ultimately will happen.
Mm-hmm.
So there's that. You're entitled to flexibility for your menopause symptoms. You just have to be prepared to raise the issue. And I know a lot of women aren't. They say, like this woman said, this her manager was some 35-year-old pisher guy who was just, the jerk to begin with and had no clue. And she's, I don't want to tell him about my menopause. You're not telling him.
Fair.
Well,
Fair.
but here's the thing, it is fair, but I wasn't about talk to your 35-year-old idiot manager about your menopause symptoms. It is you notify
You're
the
right.
top of your food chain, typically human resources. You do it officially through
Yes.
the channels, not with some, your jerky manager. The company understands that it needs to engage in this process. And the companies are not usually cavalier about, because if they subject you to backlash, if it gets worse as a result of your request, that's illegal retaliation. And I just want to add that this is what we call in the United States, this is everyone in the United States who works for an employer with at least 15 employees. It's a lot of people. You're protected under not only because of the disability issues, but it's also a sex-based claim because it's only affecting essentially, people assigned female at birth and yes, some you know, trans men and non-binary people, but it's in the main women and women in the main who are 40 and up, which means that at 40 in the United States, we're protected under the age discrimination statutes. We're protected because of for sex-based challenges in the workplace. And then there's the disability piece. So you've got this trifecta, this holy trinity of protection: sex, age, when it is age, and disability, which we also call sex plus. Sex plus another category. Sometimes it's sex plus race. Sometimes, it's sex plus children, or, who. But the cumulative sex, age, disability gives you leverage. It's what you need to know to not be in the position of this woman. And I told her, and of course, you need to raise these issues now, because if the marriage ultimately can't be saved between you and your employer, you want to be in a position to command a severance package, because they're not going to want to fire you. And if they do, after you've asked for this special treatment that you're entitled to, the flexibility, because that would smell illegal and retaliatory. Now, again, I don't want people, it's not about suing your employer. I'm not trying to, like, it might sound like, well, this is too much. Well, do you want to just get managed out the door or quit, where you don't even get to collect unemployment because your perimenopause symptoms are deeply affecting your ability to keep up with your job? And so instead, put it on the employer. This is coming. This is trending. In New York, I'm representing 10 women right now. So 10 teachers, tenured teachers. The good part is they can't be fired. They're all in menopause. Some have additional symptoms that are exacerbated by heat. All of them had requested air conditioning units during the summer months or the hotter months in their classrooms, which were given to them and then taken away. And the school has said, sorry, we don't want to pay the extra electricity, and it's an undue hardship, and it's too much aggravation to take these window units in and out. And if right now, I've been working with them to get the school, the district, to change their mind, and if they don't, we will sue them. It's over time that this will all change, like pregnancy. And in the meantime, we'll continue to bang our heads against the wall for the rights of women to continue to be gainfully employed. I mean, this is economic lifeline. And I know I've just been yammering on. So any thoughts,
Yeah.
questions?
Go ahead, Catherine.
I'll throw out there that a lot of times people wonder what is an acceptable accommodation, right? Because Jack talked about how this is a conversation you have with your employer. Like, I have menopause, this is what I'm going through. Like, what can you ask your employer for? And there are a wide range of things you can ask for, whether that's more breaks, whether it's opportunities to work from home. And an easy way to kind of determine if it's going to be an appropriate accommodation in your workplace is to look around for what they're offering other people. So if you notice that other people in similarly situated jobs are receiving certain accommodations, that is almost assuredly going to be something that, if it would help your menopause symptoms, you could potentially ask for. And I think that you probably have your best weight behind getting those accommodations because you can argue that they're already offering it to other people at your workplace. Now,
There's a
obviously,
precedence, yes.
certain
Yeah.
things come up, like with the air conditioning situation, where they're taking it away from multiple people. And so it's a bigger fight around that. But in situations where you can see, oh, you offer pregnant people this accommodation, like this is also part of the reproductive health cycle. Like, if you can offer it for them, you could offer it for me. That would be considered a fair accommodation to ask for.
Mhm.
Okay, so look to see what they've done. Go ahead, Jack.
Well, exactly what Catherine said, but I also want to just point out it is similar to what we were saying, before the show about what I encountered for decades with opposing lawyers when I was representing a woman in a pregnancy case. Here's an actual case. A woman was wooed away from her company, high level, six-figure person, to work in this company in Connecticut. She worked there for 6 months. She had quit a job to take this job. Everything was going along great. She's now pregnant. She notifies the employer that she's pregnant. The employer calls her down to HR and just says to her, listen, remind us, like, when's your due date? And she tells them, and the employer goes, you know what the problem is with that? When your water breaks, based on what you just said, you will not have worked here for a full year. And the client said, yeah. And she said, well, you should know this, that the Family and Medical Leave Act for maternity leave, you have to work for us for a full year, which is true. That is true. For the FMLA, you have to work for a full year. And you also have to work for a company with 50, that's 50 employees, as opposed to, I said earlier, all these laws or you're protected under all these laws, the discrimination laws for age, sex, disability, etc., if you work for an employer with just 15 employees, but the FMLA is 50. And that company had well more than 50, but she hadn't worked for a full year. So she said, what's your point? And the HR director said, well, you could Google this. It's not our fault. Don't blame us. Write to your congressperson, but you're not covered by the FMLA. So how many accrued days of vacation do you have or PTO? And this woman said, well, I don't know. I've only been here 6 months. You tell me. Yeah, you only have 4. Are you going to be able to have a baby and get back to work in 4 or 5 days? Of course not. So what are you saying? Well, you're just going to have to go have your baby. And when you're ready to come back to work, give us a shout. We'll see if we have a job opening for you. That happened all the time. And lawyers would say to me, my own law partner would say, and what's your point? There's no law that says pregnancy is a disability. There's no law that says we have to give you maternity leave. And I would say, seriously? Try me on this. Here's the thing. If you only worked for the same 6 months and needed FMLA leave because you had a heart attack or because you broke both legs skiing or you had long COVID or whatever, could the company say you don't have enough time to get on the FMLA leave? No, because it would be disability discrimination. So postpartum, all women are disabled for a certain period of time. That's a given. According to insurance companies, 6 weeks minimally vaginal delivery, 8 weeks for a cesarean section. So it's just they're singling women out, saying it's elective, nobody told you to get pregnant. And I would have to say to them, I'm going to litigate this case because it's sex and disability discrimination and pregnancy discrimination. And they would almost always cave at that point. This is what we're saying about menopause, is that if you're saying, they're going, well, what menopause, what? How is that protected? You show me the law where that was protected. Okay, well, let me say again, it's protected because your symptoms, and this is what we have to do now, because until we get a Menopause Fairness Act that, like pregnancy, makes menopause itself, like in a civilized culture, we should have, if we cared about women through all of their reproductive life stage changes, until menopause itself is considered protected, like we would all want for ourselves and should be, the symptoms are protected, and you're protected because you're a woman of a certain age, or as my colleague Lauren Sheeran says, women of a certain stage, and you have these disabling symptoms. It's like we do have to advocate for ourselves a teeny bit. And this is how, if you're saying, I'm going to quit, I can't deal with this shit, I want to quit, or they're starting to manage you out the door, like putting you on a PIP, don't you want to stand up and flex a bit? Don't you want to square your shoulders and say, no, if you're going, and that's what the paper trail is all about. Because if it's not going to work out, and this is, again, you could talk to, a lawyer, a plaintiff side employment lawyer in your area, or you could reach out to us. But, we're lawyers in Connecticut, New York, and California, but we give advice to people and help people all over in the country, depending, but it's always best to talk to a lawyer in your particular jurisdiction. But yes, you've got rights and you need to exercise them. And we should demystify and detabooize all of these issues from, again, don't get me started on menstruation. And we have a menstrual equity bill pending also in Congress, because they've taken all the dispensers for, you know, the products that used to be in websites and in jails and in schools. That's again right now kind of DOA because of the current political environment. But we have to keep, we have to just keep fighting for it. I mean,
Mm.
that's been the
Yeah.
basis of the work that we've done.
Well, and it's so true for those of us that do work in the menopause realm. Like, how can we not be pissed off every single day from the stories that we hear? I mean, the three of us here, we do very different things, but it's not dissimilar our own experience with it, right? I just the
Mhm.
things I hear every day will break my heart 1,000 times over and make me so angry. So, you want to act for yourself, but here's the thing. The same women who aren't likely going to their doctor saying, I'm so fucking uncomfortable with these hot flashes, please help me, or why do I feel like I have anxiety that's so bad, or why do I have depression now for the first time in my life? Where is my confidence gone? Are essentially potentially the same women that can't speak up to the 30 something. What did you call them? You had a word for it. Schmuck. That's a good one.
I don't know. I forgot
It was a
which
word I hadn't heard before.
Oh, it must have been a
Catherine, do
Yiddish
you
word.
remember?
Pisher is what he normally calls
Pisher,
them.
yes.
Yeah.
Little pisher.
Okay, what does that mean? Help me out.
I think it's, you know,
A jerk?
Yiddish word for like little schmuck with ear flaps, just a little jerky guy. I don't know. I actually don't know. That's one of those words my mother said 1,000 times, and I
Oh, it's
just
so good though. But what I'm saying is that what we have done to women as a society is that our stories are not being highlighted so easily. I mean, it's much better now than when I was a kid. I had a patient just say to me recently, when I suggested to her that she talk to her doctor about hormone replacement therapy, she said, I don't want to bother my doctor. I'm like, this is what we're here for. Bother us, please. Our
right.
job is to help you out. But I think that mentality often gets in the way of us standing up for ourselves in work. And then we have this, community or society programming that says women's things are unsavory. We don't talk about heavy bleeding. We don't talk about migraines and menstrual cramps and hot flashes. The thing, I mean, we fart, we burp, we get sweaty. There's a lot of things that happen. We rage. You don't want to be the target of that rage at menopause. It's no joke. It really is. So just so for clarity, we're protected is what you guys are saying. We're protected under a few different places. It has to, as you described so well, Jack. And we want to get as much in writing as possible. We want to submit things to our, as you said, don't go for the pisher. Is that the word? Did I say it right?
Yes.
Okay, good.
Yes.
Don't go for the pisher, go for somebody in HR if you can. And even better, like I say this quite often on the podcast, is if you can find a woman practitioner that's around your age, chances are y'all got some shared experience here, and she can relate to you and you can relate to her in some way. Maybe there's somebody in your HR department that you can just sort of reach out to, say, listen, this is what's going on. I'm going to put it in writing, but I want you to know. Or do you not recommend talking about it first? Go right
Well,
to
you could talk about it, and you could be a human being and talk about it all you want, and you should, and they're going to want to talk to you once you raise the issue. But you really need a paper trail. It's very important every conversation you have, even after you raise the issue, to say, hi Nancy, thank you so much for speaking with me this morning. I really appreciate your time. I told you this, blah 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 about my symptoms. You told me that, blah blah blah, and then you that's how you hold their feet to the fire. I've been saying this also for years about pregnancy. When women say, I told someone at the water cooler that I'm expecting, and then a week later, they fire her. There's no proof. She wasn't showing. And then it becomes more difficult, way more difficult to prove it's pregnancy discrimination. That's a real thing because companies resent it. They're not, this is always profits over people. If companies know you're going to need special treatment, you're going to be out for 3 months on maternity leave, what a pain in our butt, they can fire you, and they do. So you want the paper trail, because if you say, just to write I'm just talking about pregnancy now. If you write to benefits to HR and you say, just want to tell everybody I'm pregnant, I was just inquiring about a friendly email about about maternity leave policies in the company, that email, if things go south on the heels of that, because this is about employment law, if there's an adverse employment action, a demotion, a failure to promote, a firing, discipline, they're yelling at you, right after you raise a protected issue about pregnancy, about menopause, about sexual harassment, about equal pay, about anything that is a civil rights thing, that's something about you as a woman, as a person over 40, as a person of color, any adverse action that hits you on the heels of that in close temporal proximity is the legal phrase. Close in time behind that is presumptively illegal and retaliatory.
AG1, the way I start my healthy days. With my AG1, I get a daily dose of vitamins, minerals, pre and probiotics, adaptogens, and more. It's daily self care for my busy life. It helps me fill the nutrition gaps, supports immune health, and supports gut for healthy digestion. It's once a day, easy to drink, and packed with bioavailable ingredients in a convenient formula. I am proud to have had AG1 as a sponsor of this show for many years. It's a nutritional supplement I stand behind and I take every single day. Start with AG1 and notice the difference for yourself. It's a great first step to investing in your health. Try AG1 and get a free bottle of vitamin D3, K2, and 5 free AG1 travel packs with your first purchase at drinkag1.com/Fiona Lovely. That's a $48 value for free if you go to drinkag1.com/Fiona Lovely. Check it out.
So this is about like we're David to their Goliath always. We have to know what slingshots we have to ping them in the forehead to get what we need. And then if we can't get what we need, we want to be in a position to hold our employers accountable, to get severance, to be able to prevail if you have to ultimately bring an action. People call us every day and say, now I feel free, I quit. First of all, don't ever quit because you're just throwing out the baby with the bathwater, so to speak. If you quit, there's no case, and you won't even collect unemployment benefits. So quitting should be the last thing. Hashtag don't quit. But
Okay. So you said some words earlier that I want to come back
okay.
to about self-exile. Okay.
Well, if,
Actually, before,
Catherine wanted to say something, if you don't
sorry, I
mind.
didn't see that, Catherine. Go
I
ahead.
just wanted to throw in there that you'd mentioned earlier about how many times the women who need to report this to their supervisors are the ones who are scared to, right?
Yes.
So, and I think it's really important to stress the work that you're doing with creating menopause doulas and helping people to get a community of advocates around them so that they can feel strong to have those conversations. Because
Yes.
the work that people like Jack and I do trying to get the laws to advance in this area can only do so much, right? If people aren't taking advantage of the laws, if they're not following the suggestions that Jack's giving there of notifying their employers, we don't have legal cases. We can't help you. So it's really important that you find your tribe, whether that's a menopause doula, whether that's a menopause aware practitioner who's going to give you the help you need to have the guts to go forward, whether it's older women in your circle who've been through this before, who've had those conversations. I just really want to stress that everything Jack's saying is there and available for you, but you have to find the courage and the gumption and the tribe to make that happen. So take advantage of the resources like the menopause doulas you're training up in Canada.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you for that. Because it's true. It becomes an act of bravery and self-compassion to speak out these things, even if your mother never did it, you never saw women talking about these things that are considered unsavory, etc. It's advocacy, self-advocacy. Yes, Jack.
Well, I was just in terms of you asking, starting to ask about self-exile, and I was about to
Yeah.
say, and
Yes.
I think that's all part and parcel of this, is that when people, I started to say, when, people call up and they go, I'm free, I just quit. Now I want to sue my employer. I was just
Yes.
fired. Now I want to sue. And we're like, well, it's kind of late. Even though people think of that,
Yes.
here's the thing, you're not going to trial. This is not a Boston legal episode. And if you do go to trial, by the way, I don't wish that upon you. It's 5 years in the United States of pitched battle. It's public. You're going to be deposed. Your mental, your, if you've seen a therapist for your emotional distress, which is a compensable part of our damages, all of that gets disclosed. it's really invasive and intrusive, and it's kind of a nightmare. Yes, it might be worth it if you get a, 7-figure verdict one day, but that's a tiny percentage of cases. What this is about is the empowerment while you're still working to understand that what you really want to do is be in a position that if you are fired or if you're still working, you have stayed your employer's hand. You've checked them like in chess by saying, this shit is not right. It's illegal
Yeah.
because I'm a woman of a certain age dealing with these disabling conditions, and you're not only not accommodating me, you're punishing me for it. Most employers with a brain who don't want to spend millions of dollars in defense of these cases will get it. But even if they don't see it your way and are not one of the more progressive organizations that are fewer and far between in the United States that get it, do you want to get 9 months of your pay as a severance package to help you transition along with unemployment benefits to another job? Those are the kind of real cases that we see that are not like in the funny papers, It's not
Yeah.
everything where they go, oh, I saw somebody had a $10 million verdict. Yeah, well, that's a lottery win type of a case. And by the way, they don't tell you when you read that, they're not getting that money. That's going to be appealed for another 2 years and likely reversed or. So this is about complaining, and the self-exiling that I mentioned is because women
Yes.
they get so frustrated and depressed and downtrodden. And you know what it's like in a bad marriage? It's like battered wife syndrome. It's this
Get me the hell out. Yeah.
learned helplessness. You just keep coming back for more. You just
Yes.
go, I'm going to crawl away. But I mean, if it's you need to do that for your mental health, please do. But if you don't have another job waiting for you,
Don't.
don't do it. Like that's
No.
don't do it. You have rights, and this is what we're trying to let you know, that even if they're not telling you this, we're telling you that you have rights. These are this is again, I'm going to call repetition the mother of skill.
Yep. Sex plus.
Sex plus.
So sex plus, I'm listening.
And intersectionality, this is where the intersection of sex, age, and disability, it's powerful. Your company's not going to, still going to go no habla. What? They might do that. But if it's properly written and you raise these issues, it's not discriminatory until it's discriminatory. In other words, at the beginning, you're just simply saying, you know what? Here's what I would say. I just found out, or I just consulted with my so-and-so practitioner, and it seems, and I know not everybody wants to do it. So if you don't, want to do this, if you say, listen, I got my symptoms, it's nobody's business, I would never do that. Okay. But it's cost so many billions of dollars in the United States in lost revenue and lost for women themselves and for business, that it probably does make sense for a little self-advocacy where you have the awareness that you're entitled to flexibility. You don't have to tell them everything. You don't have to disclose your entire medical record. Your stuff is still HIPAA protected. But to a certain extent, let's get real here. It's not shameful, is it? I mean, this is what we're trying to get around. We're talking about
the taboos. Yeah.
Half the population, right? If men went through andropause,
Oh.
like women go through menopause, we would have andropause spas and retreats, right? I mean, I just want you to know, whenever I try a pregnancy case, I say to the jury and voir dire, if men could get pregnant, the family and medical leave would be 18 months long and fully paid, and everybody laughs. Why do they laugh? I don't have to explain it, because they know it's true.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. And you heard it here first, folks, from Jack, a dude, the things that we've been saying on the show for almost 10 years, which is, if men had to go through menopause, shit would be so different. It's one thing when I say it, Jack, but when you say it yourself, it's totally different. It's absolutely true. And my husband would say the same thing. He said, my God, if men bled out their wieners the way women bleed every month, the world would be a completely different place. And I
think there's a comedian. I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry, but I forgot who she's a urologist. I just saw her on TikTok, and she said, she's also like a stand-up comic, and said something like, if men's testicles fell off at 52, we would have, and I don't remember even like the full punchline, but like we would have, men's, testicle week of the, we'd be celebrating it and giving them all kinds of accommodations. And it was a much better punchline than I can remember, but that's true.
I'm loving what you're saying about the andropause spa, because that would be great. Okay, so Catherine, you said look for the precedents, look to see what your employers have done in terms of accommodating other people's needs.
And the
And
other thing I'll throw in along those lines is don't go into these discussions assuming the worst, right? Like, do protect yourself, like Jack was talking, put it in writing. But there are plenty of employers who might be willing to work with you. Not all employers, as much as we're, saying there are some bad apples out there are some people
That's
who,
right.
will recognize what you're going through, want to work through you. So try to have a constructive conversation first. If that
Yes.
starts to fall apart, that's where you start bringing in outside help like Jack or I, where we can
Mhm.
help you write the letters. Like, our goal, we don't want you to go to trial, like Jack was saying. We want this to be speedily resolved so that everyone's happy. So if you can do an internal conversation and solve it, that's the quickest and best way. If that doesn't work, slightly escalate. Bring in some outside assistance. We'll try and get it done quickly for you. It's in those rare cases, like with the UPS parcel service example Jack gave earlier, that we really have to press forward. But our hope is not that for any of your listeners today.
No,
Well said.
that's really helpful. I'm always a few times in my life, I've been amazed at the power of a well-written one-page letter from legal to
Hmm. Hmm.
somebody and the action that comes as a result of that. So, um,
Exactly.
that's a great piece of advice and awareness for my listeners. To come back to this self-exile, what I'm really aware of as a woman at the age of 51 is that I myself am in this beautiful space of deep wisdom and not giving a flying fuck about what anybody thinks about it. And I think this is exactly what the corporations need. We need women to take over leadership positions. We need women in the glass ceiling positions. And there are many of us that just do not feel well enough, even if we're offered those positions, to press forward. Now, one of the things I've become really aware of in the last year in particular is the mental symptoms of menopause. And we are really just starting to scratch the surface of understanding this. And it is absolutely true that women are twice as likely to be diagnosed with depression and anxiety in the perimenopausal era. But one of the things that the egress of hormones does to our brain in particular is it robs us of our confidence. It robs us of our ability to connect to others and things that we love and are passionate for. And so, with that, and listen, 20% by their own accounting, 20% of gynecologists feel adequately equipped to talk menopause symptoms and treatment to their patients. So if we're talking about the primary care or the GPs, what are the chances if the female health experts, only 1 in 5 of them can talk about it adequately? Forget it. And are they talking about the brain symptoms? No, they're talking about the bikini medicine, right? The pap smears and the mammograms, right? That's what makes sense. So anyways, there is a huge vacuum of understanding in society for sure, but in medicine, and the ones that are the one supposed to be helping us here, we'll get an antidepressant instead of someone saying, let's look at your hormones, maybe you're low testosterone. When we lose our confidence, that's low testosterone for most of us. We're literally in the last 6 months just starting to talk about testosterone for women. There
Hmm.
are many issues here around understanding, misunderstanding, and then we get the layers of the psychology and the community that says, oh, we don't talk about those things, it's indelicate, it's not feminine, it's all that stuff, right? So this is another layer that you guys have brought to my listeners of the show, which is to say we have rights. As employees, we have rights, and here's where they fall, and here's how you manage it. Thank you for those tidbits. So helpful from both of you. And I have a question as someone who's been a contractor. If I wasn't owning my own business, I was a contractor. So I have been fortunate in that I could, essentially do whatever I needed to with my space. Do you have any recommendations for us? I know our protections are different, if there's any at all. How do we handle it if we're going into, let's say, a new contract as a woman in perimenopause, knowing that maybe once a month we have a migraine for 2 days, or we bleed so heavily we probably shouldn't leave our house for a day or two. How do we say something up front? What do you recommend?
Well, when you say, just to define our terms, talk about like independent contractor
Yes.
versus, well, so here's the thing. In places like New York City, where our office is, where we practice, and we're ahead of we're way ahead of the game. Number one, menopause is protected in New York City because the definition of disability is just so broad. It covers menopause. We also have we have a paid leave, and when it comes to independent, we in all of New York State and the city, independent contractors are considered the same. They're covered just like W-2 employees, but
Okay.
federally, that's not the case. So in the United States, if you are an independent contractor, not like an illegal independent contractor where the company wants you to do it and you go to work every day and they're breathing down your neck and calling you an independent contractor so that they don't have to pay taxes. If you're a true independent contractor consultant who's in the field, who works from home or whatever, and you are a 1099 employee and that's what you want to be, the rules don't apply. You actually don't have these rights, unfortunately, in the United States as a contractor.
I will say though that it's true. What Jack just said is true. Like your rights just don't exist in the same way as far as that goes. But you do have negotiating rights in theory as an independent contractor, right? When you enter into an independent contractor relationship, part of what sets that up that they don't have the same taxable responsibilities to you is that you are supposed to have more power in those negotiations. So you should. It's really important if you're menopausal and you know you're going to have certain necessities, like let's say more breaks or things like that, to have those conversations as part of the contractual beginning, because sometimes you can hammer that out and work things into your contract. um, and the federal government will support that because we know they do check in with employers and employees being like, did you get to choose your own hours, did you get to do this and that.
Mm.
And so there are ways you can work within that, but also let's be realists. Sometimes independent contractors, just a name we put on things, so we don't always get the same contractual rights. But in theory, that is your protection as an independent contractor.
Oh, I love that. That was beautifully said. Thank you. There's so much power in that, and it makes me think back to when I was a new professional and seeking work. It was always job interviews were always guys, and they always asked what was my plan in terms of having babies. I was
Right,
31.
right.
And I
Well, it's
remember thinking, that's not really legal. You guys can't really ask me that. Right?
right. It's illegal. That's a completely illegal question, and it was even then,
Hmm.
but nowadays that would be. It's just that the problem is, by the way, even if they ask you that and you're not, there's no witness and you're not recording it, you don't get the job or whatever, it's difficult to prove that. But that is an illegal inquiry. There's no
Hmm.
question. Anything to do
I
with your family planning.
Yeah, that's what I figured at the time, and I remember feeling like gr gratitude to be having a job interview. Like, I think this is relevant to the conversation. It's gratitude to be having a job interview that I didn't speak up for myself despite being someone that normally speaks. Catherine, you know exactly what I'm talking about, don't you? And I think this is part of what happens. Now, again, when my hormones left the building in perimenopause, again, I stopped giving a shit about what other people think, but which is one of the beautiful things about being wise and of a certain age and having wisdom. But I remember one old guy, he actually said to me when I told him that I did not plan to have children, he said something along the lines of, I'm sick and tired of having to cover for all these women doctors having babies when their kids get sick. And I remember thinking, well, like, did you say what if that was your wife, dude? He's still practicing, Jack. Should I
Uh,
send him a letter?
yeah, that's unbelievable. And
It's
that's
crazy. And
it's
the thing
crazy.
is, you guys have heard the stories. You've heard the stories of women for how long? It's bananas what we come across.
Yeah, well, that's kind of what keeps me going every day because it is bananas. And I've said this when my daughters were young, and now that they're grown, I can't. I listen. Here's another thing before I just go up on that. I don't know if you talk about with your listeners how to find the practitioners because I know when my wife is in menopause, long since in menopause, and recently, and she's been watching for the last 3 years everything I'm posting and what I'm talking about in the podcast world, and she was talking, she's has r- really bad insomnia, total loss of libido, issues
Mhm.
with her, with her body and muscles and
Yes.
fatigue. And
Mhm.
meanwhile, she says, well, my OBGYN is not really into it. I had her take a look at, I know it's nuts. So, but me, and she also had her own, like, really, do I have to? So there's a list. Catherine, you may know the new name that I'm thinking was the North American Menopause Society.
It's the Menopause Society now.
So there's a list of
Yep.
practitioners, menopause aware or certified practitioners throughout the United States. And that's where my spouse found, somebody local that she was like, ended up being 3 miles away and she didn't even know that. And now she's on HRT and it's appreciable. There really is I mean, I'm just saying from my own experience watching,
Yes.
it's a,
Yeah.
it's kind of like magical. It's nice to get that little bit, get your mojo back a little bit, right?
100%. My husband would say the exact same thing. So I get it. And yes, the Menopause Society is a great resource. There are online clinics in the United States that are very good at handling menopause care. So there are great options. We do talk about them on the show quite a bit, but and I'm a member of the Menopause Society. So
Oh,
yes,
great.
I'm well. It's great. It makes such a difference when you actually get someone that is aware. Unfortunately, for every 10 practitioners that are not aware, there might be half of one that is
Right,
available but is so booked up. At least that's the state
right, right,
of care
right.
in a lot of places.
Yeah.
But anyways, this has been a wonderful conversation. I have learned so much, and I dare say the two of you have delivered such useful information to my community, and I thank you deeply for coming on the show. Where can people find out more about you guys?
Well, we first of all, our website, you can find us on the web at womensrightsny.com, women's, WOMENSRIGHTSNY for New York.com. Catherine and I, you could also find us on LinkedIn if you want to follow us. I'm constantly writing newsletters and doing lives about men. This has been what my focus recently in menopause. You can find me on TikTok where I just blather on about these issues.
I'm going
And
there right now. Come on.
and also if you want to, send us an email if you want to at info@womensrightsny.com or just, call the office. But those are our basic. Did I get most of it, Catherine? Those are our basic
Yeah,
you
those
want
are the basics. And we're just so appreciative for this opportunity to talk to your listeners and explain that these opportunities are out there for them.
that's right.
No individual going through menopause should do it without knowing that there are laws out there that can help them. So really hope your listeners will use this information, and thank you for letting us share it with them.
Oh, yeah, I'm really just so grateful. I'm so grateful to have you both here. Now, I'm going to ask the final question of both of you, ladies first. So, Catherine, my final question, have some fun with this. Knowing what you know now, what would you tell your younger self?
Ooh, great question. I do think that it's really important to advocate, as we've been talking about today. Um, there are people trying to pass the laws. We are trying to push the laws forward in many cities, states, even federally in the United States. If you're in another country and listening to this from Canada or Europe or Australia, you may even have better protections than we do. Most countries do. So check with what's available to you locally, and then learn how to advocate, learn those advocacy skills, and find your village. Many times women think that they have to do it alone, that that's part of being a strong, courageous woman, and it's not. We're meant to do this in community. So find your community.
Great advice. Thank you. Jack, how about you?
Yeah, I don't know. That's kind of it's a tough question, but I think that the one answer that just pops into my mind, it's not particularly inspired, is that I would have started earlier because I took detours. I had dropped out of college. I became an actor, meaning I was sort of waiting on tables and tending bar. So I lost about 10 years before I became
Yeah.
a lawyer later in life. So I'm staying later in life. So I could have accomplished way more, I think, if I were more focused, if I wasn't just, I was a child that was in college in the 70s where it was like, I'll take 7 years here and take my time. But I was particularly unfocused. So I kind of just somewhat regret starting particularly
Mhm.
late. But all roads lead to Rome, and
Yes.
I love what I do.
I would dare say that the experiences you had in your time as a actor was probably a really important part of what you do now. So
Well, it definitely helps my trial work. Absolutely. Yeah.
thank you guys so much for the
Thank
time. I
you,
really
Fiona. It's
appreciate
our
this.
pleasure. Thank
You.
you so much.
Take care
Bye-bye
now.
now. Take care. Bye-bye.
The information and other content provided in this show, or in any linked materials, is not intended and should not be construed as medical advice, nor is the information a substitute for professional medical expertise or treatment. We are doctors, but we aren't your doctor. Seek your doctor's opinion. If you or any other person has a medical concern, you should consult with your healthcare provider or seek other professional medical treatment. Never disregard professional medical advice or delay in seeking it because of something that you have heard in this podcast or in any linked materials. If you think you may have a medical emergency, call your doctor or emergency services immediately. The opinions and views expressed on this page and in this show have no relation to those of any academic, hospital, health practice, or other institution. Thank you.